She is a detriment to this school, Susan hissed, her voice echoing just a little too loudly in the sterile, wood-paneled school board meeting room. And just like that, watching her carefully constructed performance from the hard plastic chair at the back, I felt the floor drop out from under me. My breath hitched, my vision swam. This wasn't just an accusation. This was an execution. My execution. It's funny, isn't it, how quickly everything can change? How one person's poison, carefully dripped over time, can curdle everything you thought was solid, everything you'd built. Just months before, God, it felt like a lifetime ago. Months before my life was, well, it was mine. It was noisy hallways filled with the chaotic energy of middle schoolers, the satisfying scent of old books and dry erase markers, the quiet hum of knowing you were exactly where you were supposed to be. My name is Kate Reilly, and I was a teacher. Not just any teacher. I was an English teacher at Oakhaven Middle. And I didn't just teach, I lived it. It was my air, my purpose. There's this magic that happens when you see a kid finally get something, you know, that little spark behind their eyes when a line of poetry clicks, or when they argue passionately about a character's motivation. That was my fuel. I loved those kids, even the eye-rolling, hormone-fueled bundles of angst they sometimes were. I remembered their quirks, their struggles, the band sticker plastered on their binder, the way their handwriting slanted when they were nervous. I tried to make my classroom a haven, a place where they felt seen. Like Noah Peterson. He was a sixth grader back then, skinny kid, always seemed to be swimming in his clothes hair, perpetually falling into his eyes. Quiet. You could tell things weren't easy for him at home. Whispers about free lunch programs, worn-out shoes peeking from under his jeans. He rarely spoke up in class, just watched everything with these unnervingly perceptive eyes. I made a point one afternoon after class to tell him I'd read the short story he'd turned in. It was dark, yeah, maybe a little raw for an 11-year-old, but it was good, really good. I told him so. Just a simple, "Noah, this is powerful stuff. You have a real voice." He just nodded, mumbled a thanks, and shuffled out, but I saw it. A tiny flicker of something behind those watchful eyes. A spark I'd recognized. It was a small moment, the kind you have a dozen times a day as a teacher, but it mattered. They all mattered. And then there was Susan Harding, history teacher. She'd been at Oakhaven longer than I had carried herself, with this air of weary authority. At first I tried, the new teacher wanting to fit in. Coffee in the staff room, polite chit-chat about curriculum. But there was always something. A backhanded compliment about how surprisingly well my students did on a pop quiz. A dismissive wave of her hand when someone mentioned the kids seemed to really connect with me. "Oh, Kate's just the popular one," she'd say, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. It felt like tiny paper cuts, easy to ignore individually, but they added up. The pressure point, the thing that really started to crank up the tension, was the standardized testing season. You know how it is. Funding school rankings, administrative anxiety, all riding on these scores. Mr. Coleman, our principal, decent guy mostly, but definitely felt the heat from the district, kept emphasizing protocols, security, the importance of a smooth testing process. Susan, I remember, made a comment in the staff lounge, swirling her lukewarm coffee. "God, the pressure this year. Wouldn't it be nice to have a guaranteed win for once?" She laughed it off, but there was a hardness in her gaze that stuck with me. The day before the big ELA exams, I was the last one prepping materials, double-checking counts, organizing folders. The test booklets were under lock and key in the main office cabinet, the procedures rigid. I locked my classroom door, did my usual end-of-day routine, securing my own teaching materials in my designated cabinet down the hall near the copy room. As I walked towards the parking lot, exhausted but ready, I caught a glimpse of Susan near the end of the corridor, partially hidden by a bulletin board display. She wasn't looking at me exactly, but sort of observing, watching the hallway, watching the doors, watching my routine. There was a stillness about her, a calculating energy that sent a weird little shiver down my spine. I brushed it off. Teacher paranoia, end-of-year stress. Right God, I was so naive. The morning after the first day of testing, the whispers started, like static electricity building in the air before a storm. A leak. Someone had gotten access to the ELA answer key. Not the whole test, but enough. Enough to potentially invalidate the scores, enough to bring down a storm of administrative fury. My stomach plummeted. How the security was intense. Mr. Coleman called an emergency staff meeting, his face grim. He spoke about integrity, about procedures, about the serious consequences. His eyes scanned the room, lingering just a fraction of a second too long on me. No impossible. My heart started a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. Then it happened. Not in the meeting, not right away. It was subtler. A quiet word from Susan to Mr. Coleman in the hallway later that day, her hand resting sympathetically on his arm, her expression etched with practiced concern. Then Mr. Coleman called me into his office. The door clicked shut behind me, amplifying the sudden roaring in my ears. "Kate." He started steepling his fingers, avoiding my eyes. "There are some concerns about test security, specifically the ELA key." "Yes, I heard," I said, my voice tight. "It's awful. How could it happen?" He cleared his throat. "Susan mentioned seeing you near the office storage cabinet late the day before testing, after hours." The air left my lungs in a rush. "My classroom materials cabinet is down that hall, Mr. Coleman, near the copy room. You know that, not the office cabinet where the tests were. She said you seemed flustered, in a hurry." I was tired. We were all working late. My voice was rising panic, clawing at my throat. "Susan was there too, I saw her." He sighed, looking uncomfortable. "She says she was just grabbing something she forgot. Look, Kate, I know you're dedicated, but the optics..." Susan also found a crumpled piece of paper near the faculty printers later that evening. It looked like a partial copy of the key. He slid a photocopy across the desk. It was blurry, indistinct, but undeniably resembled the format. She thought it might have fallen out of someone's bag. My blood ran cold. It was a plant, a setup. "Mr. Coleman, this is insane. Susan is lying. Why would I do this? My students were prepared. I love my job." "Kate," he said, his voice taking on that firm administrative tone that signaled the conversation was over. "Right now we don't have definitive proof of anything, but there's been a breach and questions have been raised. Given the circumstances and Susan's statement, I have to issue a formal reprimand. It'll go in your file. We need to contain this for the school's reputation." "Yeah, a reprimand, based on her word. Based on manufactured suspicion, it felt like a physical blow. I stumbled out of his office, reeling. The accusation itself was devastating, but the ease with which it was accepted, the way my years of dedication evaporated in the face of her insinuation, that broke something inside me. The news spread like wildfire, fueled by whispers and speculation. Susan, of course, played the part of the concerned colleague perfectly. "Oh, it's such a shame," she'd murmur in the staff room, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Kate's usually so meticulous. Stress can make people do strange things, I suppose." Her eyes, when they met mine across the room, held a flicker of triumph. Everything changed. Colleagues who used to chat easily now avoided my gaze, offering tight, uncomfortable smiles before hurrying away. Parents I'd built relationships with over conferences and school events now looked at me with suspicion, whispering amongst themselves as I walked down the hall. But the worst part, the absolute gut-wrenching worst, was the students. Some looked confused, others disappointed. A few bolder ones whispered behind their hands as I passed. The trust, the connection I'd worked so hard to build felt fractured, maybe irreparably. My classroom, once my sanctuary, now felt like a fishbowl, and I was the specimen pinned under the harsh light of judgment. I felt utterly alone, adrift in a sea of suspicion, betrayed by a system I believed in and a colleague I had fatally underestimated. I knew with a chilling certainty that settled deep in my bones that Susan was behind this, but I had nothing. No proof, just her word against mine. And in the court of school opinion fueled by fear and gossip, her word had somehow become gospel. The days that followed bled into weeks of quiet agony. Walking into Oakhaven Middle felt like walking into enemy territory. Every hallway conversation that hushed as I approached, every averted gaze, every polite but distant response felt like another small twist of the knife. The microaggressions were constant. A teacher helpfully offering to double-check my attendance records. Another asking pointed questions about test preparation strategies in a faculty meeting, her eyes flicking towards me. Susan, meanwhile, seemed to bask in the reflected glow of the drama. Mr. Coleman perhaps trying to smooth things over, or maybe just reward the perceived whistleblower, gave her a leading role on the curriculum review committee, a position I'd expressed interest in months before. She'd glide through the halls accepting nods of approval, occasionally casting a pitying glance my way that felt more like gloating. My classroom became a tightrope walk. I tried to teach to connect, but the energy was gone. The easy rapport was replaced by a strained silence. Some students were withdrawn, hesitant to participate, maybe afraid of associating with the troubled teacher. Others, perhaps sensing vulnerability, acted out more a subtle defiance in their slumped posture or muttered comments. My passion, the very thing that drove me, felt suffocated under layers of suspicion and self-doubt. Was I imagining things? Had I done something inadvertently to make myself a target? The gaslighting was insidious, creeping into my own thoughts. Late at night, alone in my apartment, the mask would crumble. Tears of frustration, anger, and sheer overwhelming helplessness would stream down my face. I replayed every interaction with Susan, every conversation with Mr. Coleman, searching for a missed clue, a way out. I tried discreetly to fight back. I spent hours poring over school email logs, hoping for a carelessly worded message, a digital breadcrumb. Nothing. I attempted quiet conversations with colleagues I thought might be sympathetic, probing gently. "Doesn't it seem strange?" I'd ask. The timing, Susan's story. They'd shift uncomfortably, murmur something about protocols and change the subject. No one wanted to get involved. No one wanted to rock the boat. I seriously considered quitting, just walking away, leaving the poison behind, find a new school, a fresh start. But the thought felt like surrender, like letting Susan win. Like letting her narrative become the definitive story of Kate Reilly. And what about the kids? Even in this nightmare, there were still moments, a hesitant smile from a struggling student, a flash of understanding during a lesson, that reminded me why I was there. And then there was Noah. He was in my 7th grade class now, still quiet, still observant. But I started noticing him watching. Not just me, but Susan too. His eyes would narrow slightly when she walked past, a flicker of something unreadable in his expression. I remembered him telling me once briefly last year about how Ms. Harding had publicly commented on his free lunch status during a history lesson about economics, making him flush crimson. She had a way of targeting the kids she deemed less than. The ones with worn clothes, the ones who struggled academically, the ones whose parents weren't prominent in the PTA. Snide remarks about needing extra help, pointed comments about effort that dripped with condescension. I saw her do it subtle digs that flew under the administrative radar, but landed like blows on vulnerable kids. And I saw Noah see it too. He saw her dismissive wave when a kid from the poorer side of town asked a question. He heard her sigh dramatically when one of them needed help logging into the computer lab. He saw the smugness she wore like a shield, and he saw the toll it took. He saw her cruelty, and I think in his quiet way he recognized it because he'd felt it himself. One particularly bleak afternoon, standing by my classroom window, watching the rain lash against the glass, feeling the weight of it all pressing down, I caught my reflection. Haggard, defeated, and something snapped. No. I wasn't going to let her break me. I wasn't going to let her erase who I was. This wasn't just about a job, it was about my integrity, my identity. The spark wasn't huge, maybe just a tiny flicker in the suffocating darkness, but it was there. A stubborn refusal to be extinguished. I would stay, I would endure, I would keep my eyes open, and somehow, some way I would find a way to reclaim my truth, even if it felt impossible, even if it hurt like hell every single day. The breaking point came as they often do not, with a slow crumble, but with a sudden brutal snap. It was a mandatory all-staff meeting called by Mr. Coleman. The air in the library was thick with tension, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead casting a sickly pallor on everyone's faces. Coleman stood at the podium, looking stressed, shuffling papers. He talked vaguely about maintaining professional standards, about recent challenges to school integrity. His eyes kept darting towards me. My stomach twisted into a knot. I knew where this was going. Then he did it. Without naming names initially, he launched into a thinly veiled critique, talking about the importance of following security protocols meticulously, about how lapses in judgment, even seemingly minor ones, can have serious repercussions. The implication hung heavy in the air, thick and suffocating. He spoke about the need for everyone to be above reproach, especially with the ongoing scrutiny following the testing incident. Then his gaze landed squarely on me. And frankly, Ms. Reilly, he said, his voice hardening, your handling of the situation following the initial concerns raised has not helped matters. A certain defensiveness, it doesn't reflect well. The room was utterly silent. Every eye was on me. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, the sting of humiliation sharp and unbearable. It was public shaming, pure and simple, based on the lies Susan had fed him. And then Susan herself chimed in, her voice dripping with false sorrow. It's just so disappointing, Principal Coleman. She sighed, shaking her head slowly. We all expect a certain level of accountability. When that trust is broken... She let the sentence hang, her eyes flicking towards me with faux pity that was pure, unadulterated malice. That was it. The carefully constructed dam I'd built inside finally burst. The tiny spark of defiance roared into a wildfire. I stood up, my legs trembling, my voice shaking but clear. Enough! I said the word cutting through the silence. Enough of this. All heads snapped towards me. I turned to face Susan directly. Tell them the truth, Susan, I demanded, my voice gaining strength. Tell them how you planted that paper. Tell them how you lied to Mr. Coleman. Tell them why you've been trying to destroy my reputation since I got here. Gasps rippled through the room. Susan's face flushed, her mask of composure cracking for the first time. Catherine, how dare you? She sputtered, trying to regain control. This is outrageous. You're clearly unstable. Am I? I shot back, tears finally breaking free, hot and angry. Or are you just terrified the truth will come out, that everyone will see you for the jealous, manipulative... Ms. Reilly, Coleman interrupted sharply, stepping forward. That's completely inappropriate. But I couldn't stop. The injustice, the months of silent suffering, it all poured out in a torrent of desperate, messy accusations. You saw me near my own cabinet. You twisted it. You hate that the kids connect with me. You hate that I actually care. I was crying openly, now raw and exposed. I had no proof, nothing but my gut feeling and the burning certainty of being wronged. Susan stood there, regaining her footing, adopting an expression of shocked indignation. I could see the victory in her eyes. She knew I had nothing concrete. I felt the fight drain out of me, replaced by a wave of utter, crushing defeat. I was going to lose. I had already lost. And then the library door burst open. Everyone startled, turning towards the sound. Standing there, framed in the doorway, was Noah Peterson. He looked smaller than ever, clutching a crumpled piece of paper in his hand, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and fierce determination. He was breathing heavily, like he'd run all the way there. A stunned silence fell over the room. Noah ignored the collective gasp, ignored the teachers gaping at him. His gaze locked onto Mr. Coleman. He walked small steps, but unwavering, straight towards the podium. Without a word, he placed the crumpled paper on the desk in front of the principal. It was a photocopy, a slightly clearer, less smudged photocopy of the ELA answer key fragment Susan had allegedly found. I saw Ms. Harding, Noah said, his voice trembling but carrying in the absolute stillness. I saw her put this in her desk drawer, the day after she said she found it by the printer. My heart stopped. Everything stopped. He took a shaky breath and pointed a trembling finger directly at Susan. She got it from the copy room cabinet first, the locked one. I saw her fiddling with the handle earlier that week. I thought it was weird. Then I saw her make the copy late that afternoon when she thought everyone was gone. His voice gained a surge of righteous anger, fear, momentarily forgotten. She's always mean, he choked out, his eyes flashing. She's always mean to kids like me. She said, she told Mikey his shoes looked like he found them in the trash. She laughed when Maria couldn't afford the field trip. She hates us. The silence that followed was deafening. Every single eye darted from Noah's small, defiant figure to the incriminating paper on the desk to Susan. Her face had gone chalk white. The carefully constructed facade didn't just crack. It shattered into a million pieces. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted around wildly, finding no escape. And then finally, her gaze met mine. There was no malice left, no smugness. Only raw, unveiled panic and defeat. In that moment, seeing her mask fall away, seeing the truth laid bare by the bravest 11-year-old I had ever known, a wave of dizzying, unbelievable relief washed over me. The tears streaming down my face were no longer tears of despair, but of overwhelming, gut-wrenching gratitude. The aftermath was swift, almost anticlimactic after the explosion in the library. Mr. Coleman faced with Noah's testimony, and the physical evidence which under scrutiny clearly matched the master key format kept in the locked cabinet Susan shouldn't have accessed, had no choice but to investigate properly. Security footage, though grainy, corroborated Noah being near the copy room area around the time he mentioned Susan making the copy. When confronted directly away from the prying eyes of the staff, Susan's composure completely crumbled. There wasn't a dramatic confession, more of a panicked, incoherent denial that quickly dissolved under pressure. The truth, ugly and stained with jealousy, finally surfaced. The apologies came, though not all were created equal, Mr. Coleman offered a stiff, formal apology in his office, clearly embarrassed and concerned about potential fallout. He mumbled about procedures, about being misled, about trusting the wrong person. It felt inadequate, but it was something. Some colleagues offered genuine apologies, their eyes filled with regret for their earlier coolness. Others just avoided me, perhaps ashamed, perhaps indifferent now that the drama had passed. It didn't matter as much anymore. The weight had lifted. Susan wasn't fired immediately. School systems rarely work that cleanly, but she was placed on administrative leave and then quietly transferred to a district office position far away from students, far away from Oakhaven. A bureaucratic shuffling, but for me it was enough. She was gone. Noah, my unexpected hero, received praise, albeit somewhat awkwardly, from the administration. They thanked him for his civic-mindedness, a sterile phrase that felt utterly insufficient for the courage he'd shown. My thanks were quieter, more personal. I found him after school a few days later, lingering by the bike racks. "Noah," I said softly. He looked up, shuffling his feet. "What you did, that took incredible courage. Thank you. You have no idea what that meant." He just gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "She shouldn't talk to people like that," he mumbled, looking down at his worn sneakers. In that simple statement, I understood everything. It wasn't just about me. It was about standing up to the casual cruelty. He recognized the kind that targets the vulnerable. We stood there for a moment in shared silent understanding, a bond forged in the fire of injustice and redeemed by a quiet boy's bravery. And now it's peaceful. The memory of that ordeal isn't gone, of course. It's a scar, a reminder of how fragile reputation can be, how easily trust can be broken, and how isolating it feels when the system fails you. But scars fade. They become part of your story, not the whole story. I'm still here at Oakhaven Middle, sitting at my desk, the late afternoon sun slanting through the blinds, the familiar scent of books and possibility in the air. The bell just rang, that familiar clamor echoing down the hallway, signaling the end of one class and the imminent arrival of the next chaotic, wonderful wave. I take a deep breath, a real centering breath. It doesn't catch in my throat anymore. As the first few 8th graders start trickling in, dropping backpacks, chattering, I glance towards the hallway. Just for a second, I think I see him. A flash of a taller figure, maybe Noah now navigating the more complex currents of high school down the road. He catches my eye, or maybe I imagine it, but there's a quick nod exchanged across the distance. A silent acknowledgement. Respect. I turn back to my classroom, a genuine smile spreading across my face, one that reaches my eyes this time. The self-doubt, the suspicion, the bitterness, they've receded, replaced by a quiet strength, a resilience I didn't know I possessed until I was forced to find it. Susan tried to destroy me, yes. She tried to extinguish that spark the kids saw in me, the passion I had for this crazy, demanding, beautiful job. But she failed. Because in the end, the truth found a voice even if it was a small, trembling one. And because sometimes the smallest acts of courage can reignite the brightest fires. The new students are settling in, looking at me expectantly, ready to learn, ready to argue about symbolism, ready to discover their own voices. And I'm ready too. Whole again, stronger maybe, definitely wiser, ready to teach. How do you find today's story? Leave a comment below. If you like this video, please like and share. Especially, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our interesting and exciting stories.